After Trump imposed those sweeping 25% tariffs on aluminum and steel imports, the European Union retaliating with tariffs on up to $28 billion of U.S. goods. Trump making it clear this isn't over, vowing to respond in kind with sweeping retaliatory tariffs early next month.
Imagine this scene. Thousands of trucks loaded with American corn are parked at the border with Mexico. The engines are turned off, the drivers are confused, and behind the gates there is nothing. No one comes out to meet them. No one rushes to unload the goods. These shipments were part of a multi-billion-dollar export stream, a symbol of U.S. economic power in agriculture. And now, no one needs them anymore. Mexico, one of America's main trading partners, has suddenly refused to buy corn that it has been purchasing for decades. Why? Because the White House decided to protect the domestic market with tariffs that ended up hurting not competitors, but its own people.
Tariffs, there's been a lot of on and off, some inconsistency.
There's no inconsistency. I'm not like a block that just, I won't delay. It's called flexibility. It's not called inconsistency. It's called flexibility.
American farmers, the very ones who stood at rallies with flags, believing that the tariff policy would take them to new heights, are now in despair. They are losing everything: contracts, income, land that has been farmed by generations of their families. In Iowa, the heart of the U.S. corn industry, more than 10,000 farmers have been left without a market. Warehouses are overflowing. Domestic prices are collapsing. But at the same time, products in stores are only getting more expensive. How is this possible?
And police in Italy are investigating possible arson after a fire destroyed more than a dozen Tesla vehicles. Elon Musk is calling the incident at a Rome dealership terrorism. This comes as Tesla has been the target of recent protests around the world.
The answer is simple and harsh. Tariffs introduced ostensibly to protect American producers have caused a domino effect. Mexico, the largest buyer of corn from the U.S., has not simply turned away. It has switched to Brazil and Argentina. And, most alarmingly, according to the latest data, Mexican corn imports from South America have increased by 18% in just 1 year. This is not a temporary solution. This is the new reality.
I think you're going to remember today, it's going to be a free nation that we're dealing with. We're going to have a very free and beautiful nation. It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country.
But corn is just the beginning. Processing plants in Nebraska and Kansas are collapsing. Hundreds of businesses are cutting back on hours or closing down completely. People are losing their jobs. Entire industries related to feed, food, and biofuel production are suffering losses. And all because of one blind political gamble.
That's a 10. That's a good one. Yeah.
American consumers are also paying the price. Prices for bread, meat, milk, and even soda are rising because corn is not just a grain. It is the foundation of the entire U.S. food chain. According to the Department of Agriculture, domestic corn prices have risen by more than 30% since the tariffs were imposed.
After weeks of whiplash, Trump threatening tariffs, imposing some and walking back others, many Americans are feeling the uncertainty. In Swisher, Iowa, distillery owner Jeff Quint says it's paralyzing.
The bourbon industry is going to be collateral damage in this tariff war. I don't really think there's any way around that.
And he's not alone. Tonight, the majority of Americans, 61%, now say they disapprove of how the president is handling tariffs. 56% say they disapprove of his handling of the economy overall. But the president has dismissed those concerns tonight, saying he has the right to change course.
In this video, we show how one attempt at economic blackmail turned into a national crisis. Who really benefits from trade wars? And can America regain its lost position? Or is this the beginning of the end of its agricultural hegemony? The answers are coming right now.
U.S. President Donald Trump has announced a 25% tariff on all car and light truck imports into the country. It's due to come into effect on April 2nd. Economists and world leaders are warning that it will be a tax on consumers and have a chilling effect on the global economy. But to Americans, Trump paints a rosy picture, predicting that the levies will spur growth.
When reports first appeared in the news at the beginning of the year about frozen U.S. corn shipments to the Mexican border, most officials in Washington chose to downplay it. A temporary pause, system overload, everything will be resolved, press secretaries said, but no one realized at the time that this was not a simple logistical problem. It was the first alarm bell, evidence that America was losing control of a key market, and that this was happening not because of the machinations of its competitors, but on its own initiative. The import tariffs introduced by the Trump administration in an attempt to protect domestic production were initially perceived as a harsh but logical measure. The White House claimed that foreign companies were dumping, driving out American farmers, and threatening the country's food security. Under the slogan America First, new tariffs of 25% and 50% hit a whole list of goods, including corn. Washington expected this to force its trading partners, including Mexico, to buy American products even at higher prices, but the gamble backfired, not just badly, catastrophically.
With Elon Musk's views on weighing into very much national politics, national elections in Europe. And then on top of that, when you see the backdrop of Tesla upgrading its product line and the impact of them trying to chase more sales at the back end of last year, that means it's short on inventory. It can't necessarily sell as many vehicles or doesn't have as many in stock to sell. So there is that issue there of a confluence of impacts, which means that sales have been falling. Again, the question is how much more that will impact into February as well, given that the back end of last year, in 2024, Tesla sales did slip overall.
Mexico, the largest importer of American corn, quietly, without loud statements or protests, began to diversify its supplies. Just 2 months after the tariffs were introduced, the Mexican Ministry of Agriculture signed an agreement with Argentina to supply 1.8 million tons of corn per year. This was followed by a contract with Brazil for another 2.5 million tons, at prices 12% lower than those in the U.S. For comparison, a year earlier, the U.S. accounted for 90% of Mexican corn imports. Now that figure has fallen to 42%, less than half. This is not just a decline, it is a collapse.
Ready? The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States and build a factory in the United States so it doesn't have to pay the tariff.
That will take many, as you know, that will take many years.
In fact, I'll tell you, there's another theory is that the tariff, you make it so high, so horrible, so obnoxious that they'll come right away. When I do the 10% is really, first of all, 10%, when you collect it, is hundreds of billions of dollars. The numbers that you're talking, all reducing our deficit. But really, so there's two ways of looking at a tariff. You can do it as a money-making instrument, or you can do it as something to get the companies. Now, if you want the companies to come in.
Iowa, the heart of the American agricultural sector, where corn is not just a crop but a way of life, has been hit the hardest. There are more than 60,000 farms here. 1 in 3 residents is involved in agribusiness in one way or another, and it was here that people first realized that something had gone wrong. According to official data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, by the end of the first half of 2025, corn exports from Iowa to Mexico had fallen by 67%. However, independent analysts from the Mid-Agro Agricultural Center believe that the real figures are even worse. Up to 75% of contracts have been frozen or cancelled, and with them, thousands of farmers' budgets, loans, insurance policies, and future crops.
We begin with the president's trade war escalating tonight. This evening, the retaliation against the United States, Canada, and the European Union responding quickly, just hours after President Trump's 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States. Canada, the largest supplier of steel to the U.S., slapping new tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods that are sold in Canada. And the 27 countries of the European Union imposing retaliatory tariffs on up to $28 billion worth of U.S. goods sold in Europe.
Bankruptcies began in February. The Thompson family, who owns 600 acres of land near Des Moines, lost their contract with Mexico's largest buyer. Their story went viral after it was published in a local newspaper. John Thompson, 54, a third-generation farmer, said they were forced to sell half their equipment and close 3 barns because the corn stored there had simply rotted. No processor would take it at the price the family hoped to sell it for. Neighboring farms began to join forces to sell corn together in Missouri and Illinois, but these markets do not even cover a third of their previous profits. Emotions were running high. In March, Iowa saw the region's first ever corn family march, a spontaneous protest that drew more than 7,000 farmers and their families. People carried signs reading, "We don't export, we're disappearing, tariffs ate my harvest, and we're not dust on Washington's boots." Reports of the march sparked a wave of sympathy on social media, but the president's administration remained silent. No one publicly acknowledged that the crisis was caused by tariff policy. Instead, there was a statement about temporary market volatility. At the same time, the crisis spread to the processing industry. In Nebraska, home to more than 400 food and feed factories, corn supplies fell so sharply that 5 of the largest companies announced indefinite shutdowns. Among them was Agricorn Corp., one of the oldest plants in the region, which employed more than 800 people. An internal company report leaked to the press stated, due to the disruption of export shipments and Mexico's refusal to purchase, production is losing $1.2 million per month. Against this backdrop, the market began to panic. Domestic corn prices initially rose briefly due to a processing shortage, but then collapsed. As of April 2025, the price per bushel had fallen below the cost of production in a number of states. Farmers began selling their produce at $1.95 per bushel at a cost of $2.20. This meant not just losses, it meant ruin. Small farms that had neither reserves nor large contracts to survive were particularly hard hit. In Bunn County alone, 127 farms were sold in 3 months, many of which had been family-owned for over 50 years. Meanwhile, in Brazil and Argentina, on the contrary, there was an increase in agricultural activity. Logistics terminals were built and grain storage capacities were increased specifically for new export contracts with Mexico. These countries did not simply back up Mexico. They are seizing the market that the U.S. voluntarily gave up, hoping that pressure would work. But the pressure turned into isolation. The irony is that it was the farmers of Iowa and Nebraska who were the most active supporters of the tariff policy. According to a 2020 poll, more than 68% of them supported the protectionist course, believing that it would force the world to buy American. Today, these same farmers find themselves at the center of a devastating crisis created by the politicians they trusted. And while Washington searches for explanations and blames external forces, it is not crops that are ripening in the fields of the U.S. Midwest, but discontent. This discontent could turn into political and economic unrest if America does not change course urgently. When the first processing lines at factories in Nebraska, which had been working 3 shifts a month earlier, began to slow down, no one believed it was serious or long-lasting. Local media reported temporary shutdowns, the governor promised support, and federal agriculture officials claimed that the situation was under control. But then silence. Workers began to realize that it wasn't technical problems, but that raw materials were simply not reaching the warehouses. The corn that Nebraska's industry had been working with for decades had disappeared. And it didn't disappear because of crop failures or natural disasters, but because the main market no longer needed American goods. Mexico closed its doors, and the entire chain collapsed. Within 6 weeks, 17 businesses closed in Nebraska, including not only giants such as Midwest Corn Processing, but also dozens of family-owned factories that supplied feed, bioethanol, and ingredients for food production. more than 5,000 workers either lost their jobs or were laid off. The largest factory in Lincoln laid off 600 people at once, the first time in the company's 40-year history. An internal report obtained by local journalists directly named the reason: a sharp drop in exports due to foreign policy decisions that destabilized supplies. One employee, quoted anonymously, said, "We can't make feed out of thin air. If corn doesn't come from Iowa, if Mexico doesn't pay, the chain breaks, and we break with it." But the worst part was not even the number of layoffs. People began to lose not only their jobs, they lost their sense of stability. In small towns where everything depends on one or two processing plants, the closure of a factory means the end of life as they know it. In Lexington, a town with a population of about 10,000, a dry feed factory closed down. More than 70% of families in one district were left without income. Schools went into austerity mode, clubs were cut, free lunches were cancelled, and trips and programs were temporarily frozen. People began to leave. The city administration issued a statement urging residents not to panic, but even the local church spoke of trials and loss of direction in its Sunday message. At the same time, another less visible but no less painful wave began: rising prices. Tariffs introduced to protect American products affected those who were already living on the edge. In Kansas, the third largest corn-producing state, the price of a bushel rose by almost 25% in the first 4 months after the trade policy changes. This has affected the entire range of products, from bread and cereals to meat and dairy products. After all, corn is not just a product, but the basis of the feed base. If the price of feed rises, the price of everything related to livestock and food production rises. And consumers, the endpoint of this chain, are the first to feel the pinch. In June, a survey was conducted in Ohio by the Fairlife Economics Research Group. 71% of Americans surveyed said they noticeably feel the rise in food prices, especially for essential goods. 48% of them were families with below-average incomes. A young couple from Columbus told a local TV station how, over the past 2 months, they had had to give up buying ready-made meals and switch to the simplest possible diet. "We have a child, and the prices of baby food, cereal mixes, and even bread have gone up. We now buy flour and baked bread at home because a loaf of bread in the store now costs $3.20, and it used to be less than $2. This is not an isolated case, it is a trend. And all this is happening against a backdrop of nationwide anxiety. People do not understand why, despite abundant harvests and government assurances of stability in the agricultural sector, food is becoming more expensive, workers are losing their jobs, and farmers are forced to sell their crops below cost. The answer, oddly enough, lies not in the weather, the market, or competition. It lies in decisions made in high offices, far from cornfields and factories, from shops and the kitchens of ordinary families. The American food and agricultural model has long been considered one of the most stable in the world. Its strength was ensured precisely by clearly structured export chains, where corn played the role not just of a product, but of an economic bridge. This bridge began to crumble when trade policy became a tool of pressure rather than cooperation, and the destruction of one segment, such as corn exports to Mexico, has triggered a wave that is now difficult to stop. Experts say that if the U.S. does not begin to restructure its trade strategy in the coming months and reach agreements with key partners, the effect of the Mexican pullback will spread to other industries. Canada has already reduced its purchases of American wheat by 12%, and South Korea is reviewing its soybean agreement. This is not just an isolated incident, it is a systemic error. And the longer it is ignored, the deeper the fall will be. Today, looking at the empty factory floors in Nebraska and the desperate faces of Kansas farmers, it is increasingly difficult to believe in slogans about bringing back manufacturing and protecting American jobs, because in practice it turned out that where they built defenses, a wall grew. And this wall divided farmers, workers, and consumers from the government, from understanding, and from a future that until recently seemed so secure. When a long-term agreement was signed in Mexico City with Brazil and Argentina to supply corn at fixed prices for the next 5 years, an uneasy silence reigned in Washington. This step was not just another trade deal. It signaled the end of an era in which the United States could rely on its old ties and believe that the market would return on its own. Mexico was no longer waiting. It chose stability, predictability, and low-cost things that America could no longer offer. At the same time, Mexico's strategy was not a reaction, but a conscious restructuring of its entire food architecture. And the further we went, the clearer it became. The US was not just losing a market, it was losing its role in world trade, which it had considered unshakable. In the middle of the year, the Mexican Ministry of Agriculture published a report that stated explicitly, replacing American corn with supplies from South American countries saved more than $430 million in the first 8 months. That is money that did not go into the US economy, money that is now settling in Porto Alegre and Buenos Aires, rather than in Iowa and Nebraska. In addition to savings, Mexico has gained another opportunity to support its own farmers. By reducing imports from the US and obtaining favorable terms from new partners, the Mexican government has launched a large-scale program to develop domestic agricultural production, allocating $1.2 billion to modernize equipment and seed stocks. The US administration could not fail to notice this, but chose to pretend that it was only a temporary deviation from the course.